I'm here with my friend and former colleague, Jeff Joseph. Jeff is a partner at Barry Appelman and Leiden, or BAL's Denver office, and is one of the few immigration attorneys who takes the courtroom head on. In our field, where litigation is often rare, Jeff has successfully challenged multiple federal agencies, overturning visa bans, wage hikes, and narrow job interpretation that threaten access to global talent. His landmark victories have shaped the nation's immigration policy and protected the rights of thousands of workers and employers and immigrants across the country. Jeff is a nationally recognized immigration attorney. He has held top leadership roles at the American Immigration Lawyers Association, or AILA, and the Federal Bar Association. And in fact, next month, he steps into his new role as president of AILA National. He'll be leading the country's foremost association of immigration lawyers and supporting the more than 18,000 immigration lawyers across the country. He's delivered over 200 lectures, served as an expert witness, and teaches immigration law at the University of Denver. I'm so excited to be with you here today, Jeff. I saw you last month in Mexico, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next month in Denver, and it'll be celebratory because we'll be able to see the direction that you're going to take AILA. To kick off, you've been practicing immigration law for over 2 decades. You ran your own firm, and you've worked today you work at one of the nation's leading corporate immigration firms, and now you're stepping into this big leadership role at AILA National. What drew you to immigration law in the first place, and what keeps you doubling down on immigration over and over again?
Well, I'd say immigration as sort of a micro specialty sort of fell into my lap. I think that's the case with a lot of immigration practitioners. I knew very early on that I wanted to do human rights work, related work. And so I sought it out early on in my law school career. And it just so happened that, the best way to get involved in human rights work in the middle of the country is to do refugees and asylees. And so that was my first exposure to immigration law was really working with refugees and asylees. I sort of shifted gears in law school and was on the public defender's track and was going to be a public defender and had a lot of trial experience. And shortly before law school graduation, a job opportunity in corporate immigration came about. And so I ended up working at a corporate immigration firm, but transported over my trial skills and, slowly built out a removal practice within that firm. So I was kind of doing a little bit of immigration, all different aspects of immigration right off the bat, right out of law school.
So thinking back to the first few years in the field, what are some of the moments that shaped you and made you decide to be the immigration lawyer that you are today?
It's the watching the field change, watching technology change the field of immigration law has been sort of extraordinary. When we started practicing immigration law, it was literally on typewriters. We would type out our G28s on typewriters, and different color forms had to be put into the typewriter. And it was before, really even computer processing. When I became president of the Colorado chapter, which was back in 2003, we would literally mail a fax machine to each other and communicate by faxes. And that's how chapters communicated. So, watching the revolutionary change in the field of immigration law and, technology in general as applied to the field of immigration law has really kind of revolutionized, I think, the way we practice law and our ability to deliver legal services.
At what point, so I remember my dad is a criminal defense attorney in Utah, and I remember this is maybe like 2008 or so. I remember how big of a deal it was when they decided to go on the cloud, and and how there were some lawyers that they were pretty opposed to it and felt very strongly about keeping their files. What were some moments like that over the course of your career where it was hard to transition with the sort of the direction of change? And what are other moments where it was like so easy, you just were able to jump right in?
Well, especially as a litigator, when I went into court, I wanted everything in front of me. I wanted to make sure that I had every piece of paper. And so we would carry in these massive files into immigration court. And the concept of going paperless with a law firm where, you don't use files, you use everything is stored in a computer database is still something I think a lot of law firms struggle with. And frankly, a lot of law firms have not moved to sort of this paperless environment. So, that was a revolutionary change when we went sort of paperless with files and the comfort of going into court knowing that you still have everything at your fingertips. You may just have to press a key rather than open a file to get to it.
I can imagine too, it's nice when you're going to court. Like you might lay out sorts of stacks of paper and like have it all organized there in front of you. And even the clicks on the iPad, like you get lost a little bit or you go down a certain, file path that is the wrong one. It can maybe be a little bit awkward.
Absolutely, yeah, and frankly, the immigration system has not caught up to where it needs to be with technology. That the fact that we're still filing paper filings with USCIS is so beyond where we should be right now. If we could be moving to electric filing, but hopefully that's in the future as well.
So, Jeff, this is perfect timing because next month you will become AILA National President, and we have the unique opportunity to talk a lot about what AILA has been doing and what AILA will be doing under your leadership. We are in unprecedented times, and I know you've been feeling that. I've been following the things that you've been sharing on LinkedIn regularly and following some of the different actions that AILA has been taking. And I talk to lawyers every single day, from solo practitioners to partners at high volume firms. Talk to a lot of folks in the nonprofit sector and nonprofit lawyers and many others. And they're all underwater right now, and they're trying to keep up with all these policy changes. But almost every single one of them has told me, unprompted, how much they rely on AILA emails and these alerts to stay on top of the roller coaster of all of these policy changes that we're seeing under the Trump administration. How does AILA keep these crucial communication operations running in times like these that are so unprecedented? And how might this operation evolve in this essential moment that we're dealing in the industry that we're dealing with in the industry right now to be able to help immigration attorneys in new ways?
Yeah, and I'll be completely honest about it because, in my role as on the executive committee, I sort of have a lot of visibility not only to member needs and what members want, but also to our staff capacity and what the staff is capable of producing. And for, a close to 18,000 member association, we rely on a very, very slim amount of staff resources. And so, if I'm being completely honest with you, it has been very challenging to keep up with the demands of what members need and be able to prioritize within the budget that AILA has of what we actually can produce. And so I want to talk first about the staff and how amazing they are. And then I want to talk about the army of volunteers that we have in AILA and the fact that that's really what makes us able to drive this machine is the close to 700 volunteers that we have that serve on our committees and help.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize it was 700. That's 700. Incredible.
In fact, right now, as we speak, I'm going through the process of, going through our over 50 committees and assigning 700 members and really trying to focus on diversity and creating new leadership and pipelines for talent. So it's a very important project that the president-elect takes on to make sure that the leadership that we're fostering has growth and takes us into the future. So I want to talk first about the staff, because the government relations team, the practice management team, the litigation team, all of the different portfolios of AILA are working around the clock. Every time there's a new grenade thrown by this administration, literally, it's almost like they knew that they knew it was going to detonate because we're 2 steps ahead of it and already putting out practice advisories. And so I first want to commend the amazing AILA staff for the amount of work that they're doing. And then the second piece of this is the volunteers, the people from AILA, the AILA members who, in addition to their day jobs are volunteering time away from their families to help put out really cutting edge practice advisories and strategic alerts and ethics advisories and practice management help. and just liaison minutes and tons of different information so that members can feel prepared to go back to their clients with the kind of advocacy and resources that they need to be educated about what we're dealing with. And it's been a challenge. I'm not going to lie. It's been a resource drain, and it's been a challenge to keep up with the constant barrage of information. And AILA members have been great. They've been patient. I will say that it's a time where we have to prioritize. We can't be putting out press releases and media commentary on every single thing that happens. And so that's, we're not a media communications company. We're really a member-driven organization. And so you're going to see less and less of certain things that we've done in the past, mainly because we have to prioritize on really addressing what members need most.
So AILA hasn't shied away from litigation in recent years, whether it was the H-4 or L-2 work permit delays, the recent litigation from the overnight change in the form that the Trump admin pushed, or pushing back against country bans. From your perspective, what role should litigation play in AILA's broader strategy? And where do you see the biggest legal fights coming next?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just another weapon in our arsenal, right? We have, luckily, have very, very solid, long-lasting government relationships that we've built through decades of very good liaison work and building those relationships. And it's a fine balance when there's new administrations that come in that, we know that we're going to have to litigate. We're going to have to push back on issues that we can't resolve through those relationships. We're going to have to sue, and we know that. And so the balance is really how do we litigate and aggressively advocate for member needs while at the same time not, creating antagonism with the partners that we're also trying to liaison with. And so, I think it's as important as anything else that AILA does, especially in an administration where we're not seeing liaison relationships, where we're seeing pushback and the inability to come to the table and talk about things. That's fine. The consequence of that kind of stonewalling is that we end up in court a lot more. And so, sort of anecdotally, having been in leadership and gone through Trump 1.0 and having filed a lot of litigation during that administration, the sea change that we see in preparedness and ability to go to court and the massive amount of attorneys and litigation that is being filed now compared to 4 years ago is inspiring. It's an evidence to me that we're going to get through this and that we've assembled an army of talented people that are ready to take on the challenges that lie ahead. And so I'm really inspired every day watching the kind of litigation that's happening around the country and the successes we're seeing in court.
I'm inspired too, and I have talked to lawyers who have done very little litigation or no litigation in the past who are starting to do litigation work. And I know that you have done litigation work many times over the course of your career. You've experienced many different types of immigration work from, you described starting out your career working in refugee and asylum law. And obviously you work at BAL doing lots of corporate immigration work. Tell us a little bit about some of the litigation work that you've done over the years and how it's inspired you in your work at AILA, because I know you and I have had conversations about some of the amazing litigation work that you've done, and I find it incredible because you can impact so many people. And working in technology, I love when you can open your computer and access millions of people. And litigation work is similar. You go to court and there's a change, and that can impact the lives of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people. So I'd love to zoom in a little bit more into some of your specific litigation work that you've done.
Yeah, sure. So, I was blessed because I did have a significant amount of trial experience going into the field of immigration. Historically, it's never been something that we've had to do. Immigration lawyers have really been able to avoid, for the most part, going to court. Obviously, if you're in the removal field, you saw a lot of petitions for review of, if you lost in immigration court, you could take things up to the circuit court on petition for review. But actual affirmative litigation against the government for petition denials was not something we really saw early on in, the immigration law field. It really started after 1997, after the changes in the law that came about in 1997, that, the mandatory detention for certain crimes really opened up the need for habeas corpus relief. And so I think where we really saw the first sort of explosion of this type of work was in habeas in the 90s after IRA. And that's how I got really involved is, we'd go to court and the judge would say, sorry, no jurisdiction. Congress says you don't get a bond in these cases. And we said that's unconstitutional. You can't really detain somebody for a civil violation without end, without bond. And so we took those cases to federal court and, we're very successful in getting that provision of law overturned as being unconstitutional. And then there were cases that extended to prolonged detention and post-order detention. And so a lot of the initial litigation was around detention. And then we started seeing, petition denials, especially, as the economy started to tighten and we saw petition denials. We started taking those cases on what's called the Administrative Procedures Act, which is essentially the framework for how agencies have to interact with the public, right? They have to follow certain rules. If they're going to change policies, for example, there's a democratic process they have to go through to do that, and the public gets input into that. And so anytime the agency sort of willy-nilly changes the way that they do things without notice and comment, that's ripe for litigation. And so we started filing a lot of that type of litigation. And then in the Trump administration, there were widespread whole-scale policy changes like shutting down, visa processing at the consulates. And so we started filing, more mass large-scale actions challenging those things. And so I've been blessed because I've gotten to do everything from, habeas to mandamus to APA challenges to mass actions to class actions and been able to experience a little bit of all of it in the field of immigration.
So on the flip side of litigation, let's talk about how AILA can cooperate and work with the government. From your perspective, how will AILA interface with agencies like USCIS, ICE, and CBP under the Trump administration and be a go-betweener for the government and immigration attorneys who are representing their individual clients? And are there any lessons that AILA has learned from the last Trump administration that can improve the government relations this time around?
Yeah, I think number one is, a lot of the people that remain in these positions in the various administrations are career professionals, right? They're there in Republican and Democratic administrations, and generally those are the people that have the greatest sense of their mission and what their actual job is. And so we find that those kind of career politicians are the easiest to sort of interface with because at the end of the day, we all are on the same page that we want the train moving in the same direction, right? Everybody wants to get their job done with the least amount of work as possible. And so I don't think that goes away. It didn't go away during Trump 1.0. A lot of it was more informal. It was done at the field office level rather than at the national headquarters level. A lot of that, like, for example, Department of State liaison remained very vibrant and alive during the Trump 1.0. And I think we'll still see those kind of relationships continue. I think it will be driven a lot more local through local liaison rather than national liaison. But the hope is that, we can at least get some progress by talking about things rather than going to court. And I think the government is going to learn their lesson if they don't do that. We saw very clearly in the CBIS litigation what happens if you, do a policy without informing the public and you surprise them. The reaction could be pretty dramatic. And that's exactly what we saw in the CBIS litigation with, over 50 lawsuits filed and over, 50 TROs granted in 30 different district courts around the country. So it became very visible very fast.
So there's been a rise with all of this litigation work and coalition building. And I know that AILA has been working alongside organizations from the ACLU to other organizations in the space that are doing immigration litigation. And I know they're also working, that you all have been working with big firm attorneys and as well as nonprofit litigators. From your vantage point, what are the kinds of collaborations that are most useful right now? And what more could we do as an industry to continue to collaborate and be working together on all of these efforts?
It's a foundational and a fundamental question, I think, because when the government goes after, and we'll take the CVIS example as an example, when they go after 8,000 students, there's no competition for work. It's not like we're competing for each other for that amount of plaintiffs, right? There's plenty of work to go around. And so it was absolutely beautiful to watch the collegiality and the collaboration of attorneys get together on this issue, sharing complaints with each other, sharing TROs, sharing anecdotally what the issues were that were arising in their court hearings. We're now at this point where we've gotten the government to kind of backtrack on 90% of these issues. And now we're talking about settlements and what kind of settlements we should enter into. And it's almost like we have this massive law firm working together. We're all representing our individual plaintiffs, but we're all working together massively on one sort of strategy. And it's paid off in spades because, it's hard to go into a court and lose when you can say, Judge, here's the 40 other TROs that were granted last night on this issue, right? It gives the judge a template and a framework by which they can issue their own decision. So that kind of collaboration works beautifully. The other kinds of collaborations that I think are really important as we go forward are these collaborations between AILA and partner organizations. AILA has never been in the litigation game. We have one person on AILA's staff that is actually a litigator, and so we wouldn't be able to do the kind of litigation that we're doing without those kind of partnerships with nonprofits. And I'll be honest, most of the time AILA's in the background. We're not taking the lead. We're sort of in the background on these cases, providing subject matter expertise, and where necessary, we'll litigate, as we did in the registration case. But we are really looking to partner with other organizations in sort of a supportive capacity. And then the third type of collaboration that I sort of built out during Trump 1.0 is, at that point, I was not with BAL, I was with a small firm. And, litigation takes a lot of resources and capacity. And we knew that we couldn't do the kind of work we wanted to do as a small firm. And so I created an organization called Impact, IMMPACT, which is basically designed as a collab for litigation. And the idea was that subject matter experts could bring us ideas that they wanted to litigate and that we would collaborate with them on the litigation equally. And so, they would contribute their subject matter expertise. We would contribute our litigation expertise. We had an infrastructure built out to do the finances, and then we could take on these sort of massive litigation opportunities. And that's what we did a lot in Trump 1.0 as a way of challenging the different visa bans. So that's the other successful opportunity is sort of collaborations between law firms to work together on a particular issue.
And what do you recommend lawyers that are listening to this do to replicate a similar model and to partner with other colleagues that are working across geographies and across different verticals within the industry to create something similar?
I think first of all, realize that, in litigation, nobody expects you to recreate the wheel every single time. There's a reason that you can have access to a lot of the documents on PACER and even through AILA, template complaints and template motions that you can use because they've been successful in the past. So first, rely on the work that's been successful in the past. Second, get a mentor. Never go into federal court alone your first time. Take a co-counsel with you. And third, if you're not interested in litigation, don't just blow it off. Just find somebody that is willing to take on those cases for your clients. And so finding those collaborations where, maybe, for example, you represent doctors and you've got a bunch of doctors that have a particular legal issue. You may not want to litigate it, but you could bring that issue to an organization like Impact and be the subject matter expert and participate in the litigation through doing that.
So AILA is made up of attorneys from all kinds of backgrounds, from firm size to political view to practice area to geography and nationality. In your work within the organization and now coming in as president, what have you learned about consensus building across such a diverse community? I would guess we've got the most diverse community of lawyers out of any industry, out of any legal industry in the country. So obviously it's important, and I know from conversation you and I have had, this is something top of mind for you.
It is, and it's, not only is it diverse in terms of the makeup of our lawyers, but it's also just very, very different populations of people we serve, right? Everything from, lawyers who only serve nonprofit in the humanitarian space to firms like BAL and Fragaman and Wolfsdorf and others that serve massive major corporations. And so the interests driving those two populations are very, very different. And so you're correct, Matt, that one of the challenges is how do we create an association that it creates a space and an opportunity for all of those people to thrive and grow. One of the ways we do that the best, I think, is through our programming. I think our AILA's programming is by far the best in the universe. Is if you're in the field of immigration, we are able through our conferences, through our publications, through our client resources, to produce materials that are cutting edge, that are current, that people need in order to drive their practices. And we also provide programming on the same. So that's the best way we do it, and I think that's where AILA becomes sort of an invaluable resource. The annual conference is a good example of that. Just the 4 days of programming across several different tracks. You're going to get everything from practice management, well-being, business related, litigation related, family removal, humanitarian. No matter what you're looking for at AILA, there's going to be a track where you can get a lot of information and a lot of solid resources.
You guys have done a great job with that. I saw that. I've seen it at the regional conferences, seen it at the national conference, and it's inspiring to see people from so many different backgrounds coming together and building community with one another. So, what's your vision for AILA over the next few years? Are there specific goals or priorities that you're bringing in as your term as president?
Yeah, so I'd say let me focus on external and internal. Internally, it's an exciting year for AILA because in our entire history, we have never really evaluated the way we govern or the way we're structured. And so there have been attempts in the past to sort of look at the board and look at the way we govern and make changes. But for the first time, the membership is going to be asked to vote in about 6 months on restructuring or the way we govern altogether. So just to give you some perspective on that, we are a 93 member board right now. And that 93 member
That's
board
a big board. I didn't
is a
realize.
very, very large board, and it gets bigger every year because it's designed to be a representative board, which means we have representatives of all the chapters around the country and around the globe. We also have an elected 21 member elected board who are elected by the members. We have an executive committee of 7 of us that also serve on the board. And then every past president has a universal forever seat on the board. And so, as board members live longer, past presidents live longer, our board will only get bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can imagine that, even getting a board to agree to give up some power and to say, is this really the way we want to do this into the future was quite a challenge. And so our board had the courage and the leadership this year to decide that this is something they want to do. And so we are going to go from a 93 board down to about a 26 to 30, depending on how it's going to pan out in the end, about a 26 member board. And it's going to go from a representative board to largely a strategic board where we're really creating a board of people to take our organization into the future. And so a lot of work right now internally is going into this board restructure because it's going to involve reevaluating the relationships between chapters, creating sort of regional centers where people can have a pipeline to leadership in their region as opposed to having just to go from chapter to national. It will involve a council of past presidents that serve as an advisory council and elect certain members to come up to the board. So a lot of really kind of restructuring of the way we do business with a strategic focus rather than a representative focus. So I'm super excited about that opportunity and what that means for the future of AILA and our ability to really provide the best services that we can to our members. Externally, I am heavily focused on what I think is an attack on our profession. And when I say our profession, I mean immigration lawyers in general. The fact that this administration issued a memo that targeted, out of all the industries in the world that they could have chosen, they chose specifically immigration lawyers to target out for wide-scale fraud and to to instruct the Department of Justice to investigate any lawyer who's filed an asylum claim or litigated against the government for the past 11 years. That to me is unprecedented. It is scary. It's chilling. And it's not something we're just going to sit back and watch happen. And so the first thing that I've done as an official duty is to stand up a task force for the rule of law. And it's really designed to watch out for the integrity of our profession, to stand up for the righteousness of lawyers within our profession that we all know. And in those cases where the government comes after our profession, to fight back. And so for me, that's really my critical focus is to really stand up for the rule of law and to not allow the government to intimidate us into not going to court and defending the rights of our citizens and the clients we represent.
That's awesome. And I had Jared Jascott on the podcast. He was one of our early guests, and he did a post on LinkedIn talking precisely about this thing. He primarily does removal defense, special immigrant juvenile. He spends a lot of time in immigration court. And he said never in the course of his career has he had fear of just doing his job and practicing his profession. But some of the executive orders that have come out and some of the approaches that the Trump administration has taken, it's driving real fear among lawyers trying to, especially immigration lawyers that are just trying to do their job. And so to hear that that's a big priority for you and that that you're standing up a task force, I'm sure that'll be very reassuring for lawyers that are doing some of the hardest work in the space. I feel lucky to talk to immigration lawyers every day, and it's interesting. You hear from some lawyers that changes in the administration haven't impacted their day-to-day very much, and you hear from other lawyers who are even considering pivoting to other areas of immigration law where they don't feel fearful. And so to have an organization like AILA to have their back like that, I'm sure that'll be powerful for them, and it'll give them the reassurance and backing that they need to continue to move forward within their practice.
I really, really hope so. I can tell you, if I'm being completely honest and vulnerable myself, is that I had a lot of anxiety about this election and what it meant for me personally going into being president of the association, but also to our bar association. So I 100% relate to people that are afraid and, worried about what this means for a profession. On the other hand, I don't think there's ever been a time where we've been more built to make change, that this is what we paid for, this is what we invested our time and our money to do, and we are better situated to take on this fight than anyone else in the world. It's what we're built for, and I've changed my fear to excitement, and really that's kind of the framework that I'm trying to approach the next 4 years from, is that I'm going to make change. I'm going to fight hard, and I'm not going to be afraid to make change because we're the best position to do it.
And it's inspiring that as a industry, immigration lawyers can come together and show the bar as a whole and immigration lawyers in other domain areas that you can stand up to a government that is doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And immigration, I think, is one of the most clear examples of overreach within the government that is happening. And we look at other domain areas within the law, and law firms and professional organizations have taken a different approach. And to see AILA and you and others within our industry hold their ground, it's really inspiring, and it shows that there's another alternative.
That's what I hope. That's my hope for all of us. So,
and you're a fighter. I think immigration lawyers are fighters. All lawyers are fighters, but maybe immigration lawyers are the strongest fighters. So
yeah, and look, I'm not here to defend 100% of our members. I'm sure there is fraud in our bar association, just like there's fraud in every other industry out there. Mm-hmm. What I am here to defend is that this sort of wide-scale dragnet attack that this administration has done against our bar is not my experience. It's not the people that I know and that I've met in AILA. Those people are heroes, and On the contrary, they're some of the most righteous people I've ever met. And so that's what I'm here to defend is we're not going to sit by and let you attack the integrity of us as a people.
It's amazing. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about tech. Immigration law is advancing really quickly from work that law firms are doing internally to new case management platforms that are emerging, AI drafting solutions. Last AILA, it was maybe 20 to 30% were new companies. And of course, many startups like Lawfully are now offering better solutions to longstanding problems within the industry. There are more solutions out there that are thoughtfully designed specifically for immigration lawyers than we've ever seen before. But many lawyers are still hesitant to move beyond the familiar tools that they've always used. And while some have started adopting these new tools, I still think that there's a lot of room for adoption industry-wide. So from your perspective, what are some of the most promising opportunities to modernize immigration practices through legal tech? And what do you think are some of the barriers for those that are fully embracing these new innovations? Those that are not fully embracing these new innovations?
Right. So let me start with what I think are the huge opportunities in the field of tech. Because what I love is every time I go to conference, there's a new technology that I'm like, damn, I could use that. And every single time there's something that's really cool and edgy and cutting edge. But I also don't want to have 95 different apps sitting on my desktop and having to rely on, 95 different products. So where I think the huge opportunity is how do we get all these tools to play together in the same sandbox? And so, really the integrations and the ability for these softwares to work together to me is really where the big opportunity is. And where I would want to invest my dollars, right, rather than having to do a million things. So that's where I'd first start with. The second thing I'd start with is if you have not started to get on this train, you must start to get on the train, or you're going to time yourself out of this practice because we know it's coming. We know if paper or electronic filing is coming. We know that clients expect it. Even, it doesn't matter what type of field you're in anymore. It used to be like, if you're on the removal or family side, it's not expected. That's just not the case anymore. People do expect to be able to engage with you through technology, and they expect it on their cell phones, not just on a computer. So, every practitioner out there, no matter what your field, needs to start thinking about, if you have not, moving towards some sort of technology platform, because the courts are there, USCIS is going there, the federal courts are there, and we need to be there too. And then just do your homework. Do your homework as far as the technology piece. But once you've made a decision, your homework doesn't end, because if I'm going to apostolize about anything, it's that your software is only as good as the training that you get to use it. And so really, keeping up with the training, learning the updates and what those updates do for you is also important. Because you can have a great software product, but if you're only using 5% of it because you haven't been trained on it, it's only as good as what you're using. So really invest in the training for your teams as well. And then the last piece is your biggest resistance to technology is not going to be you as the purchaser. It's going to be your people who have to implement it. And so the change management piece of this and communicating it and getting buy-in from your teams, I think is really, really important if you're introducing new technology.
I've seen some firms that the team really makes the decision, and if you don't have buy-in from the team, it's not going to get used, and sometimes the team will be using things and you may not even realize it, and so both learning a little bit more about how they're doing their work and empowering them to be able to use the tools that are going to make them more efficient. So I want to end with a fun one, a little thought experiment. Let's say you've been given full control over modernizing the U.S. immigration system. You've got full control of the government, of all the law firms, of the tech companies. Everyone reports to you. You have no budget constraints, no bureaucratic hurdles. All you have is a blank slate. But you have to operate under current laws because in this imaginary scenario, we'll still recognize that there's the unfortunate reality of congressional inaction. So, what's the first thing that you would fix, and how would you fix it?
Yeah, so that's a really complicated question, Matt, because like just asking me that question, my mind automatically goes to like, here's what I do in business, here's what I do in this field, here's what, right? And so there's like 16 different solutions, and it's one of the things that I think is most interesting and challenging about immigration is that that's part of the problem is that there's humanitarian-based immigration, family-based immigration, employment-based immigration, and they don't fit nicely together. So the
Hmm.
first thing that I'd want to do is basically part of the reason I think you have to fix the whole enchilada rather than pieces in the enchilada is because they don't work nicely together right now.
Hmm.
So from a 30,000 foot level, the first thing I do is like everybody has to work together. But I also think that part of the problem that we've had with immigration is that it's such a focus on federalism, that it has to be run by the federal government. And I do
Hmm.
think that there is a space for states to play in the game of immigration. So, for example, the state of Colorado is a heavily resort driven agricultural state. Our needs are very different than a city like New York City or a metropolitan city. And so you can utilize state statistics, Bureau of Labor's BLS statistics, Department of Labor statistics to really drill down what are the actual economic needs of a particular state, maybe even a microregion like a municipality, and have the employment and visa needs be responsive to those particular localities. So if we need more H-2As and H-2Bs in Denver, then let the economy demand and drive what the visa numbers are rather than some artificial number. So to me, I would make
That's such a good idea.
states more active in the role of what they actually need. And if a state doesn't need it, then they don't demand the visas. So I would have a lot more granular involvement of the states in that. And then, the other piece of this is that the system we have for employment-based and family-based visas doesn't make sense. It was created in 1952. It hasn't been updated. The numbers remain stagnant. Dependents are counted against that. So you really have to address the backlogs in the visa bulletin, and get those families on a path to more quick residence, whether they're doing it through employment or family. And then I know it's a dirty word, but to me it's not. But I think you have to do something. What the government's trying to do now by registration is actually having the adverse effect because it's driving people further into the shadows. Nobody wants to register for a program that puts them on this
Hmm.
on up for deportation. It's like waving a sign saying, "Here I am, come deport me." And so the net impact of that is driving people further into the shadows rather than out of the shadows. I would propose that you actually do the opposite. You create an incentive to come out of the shadows that puts people on a pathway to permanent residence. They pay a penalty fee. They make sure we vet them to make sure that they're not here to commit harm or have crimes. You make them back pay their taxes, but you put them on a path towards legalization and bring them out of the shadows rather than drive them further into the shadows. So, and then, you live up to your humanitarian obligations under international law to take refugees like you're supposed to. You don't violate our convention treaty obligations and say we're shutting down refugee admissions. You do what you're supposed to, and you follow the conventions and what we've agreed to under international law under our humanitarian obligations. So at a 30,000 foot level, those are just some of the things that I would utilize that rely on current law, really.
What would you do about the caps and the chargeability?
I would not count dependents against the cap. I would allow for cross chargeability to any family member, not just to spouses. I think there are ways that you can fix chargeability even to make it more broad. So.
I think that's a great answer, and it's a good.
I'd also bring back 245I. I mean, if you filed something, if you file something and pay a penalty, and you have a means of immigrating, you can pay a penalty and be forgiven for your unlawful presence in the country.
Yeah,
Those are
what's
tools
the
that
year for
exist.
245I? 1972?
No, that's registration. That's another thing you could do is move up
Oh,
the registry date, right? So if you've been in the United States since 1972, there's a provision that allows you to register and seek permanent residence, but you could easily move that registry date up to 2000 or 2015 or whatever you wanted so that more people.
2025.
So there are tools that we have in our existing arsenal The government is utilizing registration now as an enforcement tool, but you could equally use it as a legalization tool, as an amnesty. And I don't think amnesty is a dirty word. I think it's something that we're going to have to talk about at some point.
Well, Ronald Reagan, he is the last one to grant such broad amnesty. And so,
Which
I
feeds
know
my
that,
first point that immigration is ultimately for me an economic issue. Reagan understood, as did most economists, that the sustainability of Social Security into the future, really the sustainability of our GDP, depends on healthy economic immigration and healthy immigration growth. And in a world where we're decreasing immigration growth, it's going to have a net impact on our economy eventually.
yeah, you're right about that.
We can't bring companies back to the United States under this tariff policy and bring manufacturing jobs back to the US without visas for the manufacturing industry. And there are none. There are literally no visas for the manufacturing industry if it's a year-round job.
You can't have your cake and eat it too. And
Right.
if you want the golden age of American manufacturing, maybe look at the golden age of maybe look at the previous golden ages of America. What did they all have in common? They were periods of extremely high migration. And so if you want another golden age and you want to foster growth, you want to foster increases in GDP per capita and manufacturing here in America, you probably need immigration to go along with
You
it.
definitely need immigration. And that doesn't have to have a net impact on US citizens or workers, because I equally advocate that we should really be more investing in trade schools. And not everyone has to go to college in our country. There are a lot of professions that you can do that require trade school. And I'm a huge advocate that we need to focus more on that as well. But either way, we have to do something because we're not
Mhm.
going to fill these jobs with our kids right now.
Jeff, this was such a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a busy time for you and your colleagues, both at BAL and at AILA. So thank you so much. And I'm so excited to see you in Denver. To finish off here, where's the best place for folks to reach out to you?
Always by email is the best to reach me. You can reach me at jeff@immigrationissues.com. Also, I hope to see you at the AILA conference. If you see me in the hall, stop and say hi.
We'll be there celebrating you for sure.
Thanks, Matt. It was a pleasure to do this. And as always, I enjoy spending time with you.